Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us for the e-launch and discussion of the State of Southeast Asia Survey 2023. I am Xiu Jiahui of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, your MC for this morning. Before we begin, please allow me to draw your attention to a few housekeeping matters. For technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to our technical support team. To ask questions of the speakers, please use the Q&A function stating your name and affiliation together with your question. Thank you for your cooperation. To begin the proceedings, I would like to invite Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Head of the ASEAN Studies Centre, Director and CEO of ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, to deliver his welcome remarks and to launch the survey. Mr. Choi, please.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the launch of the State of Southeast Asia 2023 survey report. This survey has been conducted annually by the ASEAN Studies Centre of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute since 2019. After 4 editions, the survey has proven to be more relevant than ever in providing insights into Southeast Asia's responses to the rapidly changing geopolitical environment and challenges that the region is facing. It continues to be one of our most read and also most cited publications, and serves as a useful reference for those in the academic community, media, governments, business, civil society, and international organizations who wish to understand the prevailing attitudes of regional opinion makers on a wide range of issues that have an impact on Southeast Asia and on ASEAN. This year's survey polled the views of 1,308 thought leaders from across the 10 ASEAN countries, comprising of different age groups and also a variety of affiliations. The survey was conducted over 8 weeks from mid-November last year to early January this year. The shared concerns and preoccupations of Southeast Asians, as well as the diverse opinions on ASEAN's regional standing, can be gleaned from the results at both regional and also at country levels. Against the backdrop of a more complex world, including rising economic uncertainties and increasing geopolitical tensions due to the Russia-Ukraine war, military tensions in the Taiwan Straits, the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, and intensifying rivalry between China and the US, this year's survey has included questions on several new challenges facing the region. I hope these new findings, as well as the trends for ongoing issues, will be of interest and value to many decision makers and analysts from around the world. Among the new questions explored in this edition are the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, tensions in the Taiwan Straits, Timor-Leste membership in ASEAN, China's new Global Security Initiative, or GSI, and the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, or IPEF. I believe that other popular questions, such as how to move the Myanmar issue in ASEAN forward, the regional influence and leadership credentials of major powers, views about the Biden administration, and also the future of relations with China remain pertinent. Apart from gaining insights into the impact of these geopolitical developments, I'm sure many of you are interested to continue observing the trends and shifts in perceptions of the region's trust towards the major powers and the extent of their soft power influence in the region. With the benefit of 5 years' worth of data, we are able to conduct time series analysis to observe the continuity of existing trends and also the emergence of new ones, while I believe that interesting country-level data will also be useful for more in-depth analysis for those interested to do so. With that very brief introduction of the survey, I look forward to hearing the analysis and interpretations of the findings by a very distinguished panel of speakers consisting of Professor Tommy Koh, Mr. Shivshankar Menon, Ms. Wendy Cutler, and Professor Chen Dongxiao. Their insights will be beneficial in helping to unpack the results of the survey. Before we get to that, let me first invite Ms. Sharon Seah, who is the Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the ASEAN Studies Centre, to introduce the State of Southeast Asia 2023 survey and also to present its key findings. So over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Let me share my slides. So thank you for the welcome remarks and for launching the survey. Let's now dive into the State of Southeast Asia 2023 survey report. So very quickly about the survey, you've already heard from the welcome remarks that it's to present a snapshot of the views and perspectives of opinion makers, policymakers, thought leaders in the region about what's happening around us. So for this year, we managed to obtain the views of 1,308 respondents across the 10 ASEAN countries. The criteria we used was across nationality, affiliation, age, and also knowledge about current affairs. We increased the number of questions from 50 to 54. This was conducted online with 80% of respondents doing it online and about 20% responding via the computer-assisted personal interview methods. And across all the results, except for the profile results, we apply a 10% weightage. So in terms of nationality, you can see here that last year, the leading respondents came from Philippines and Myanmar. This year, Singapore led with the highest number of respondents at 208, followed by Thailand and Vietnam. In terms of affiliation, we had a reversal this year with the largest affiliation group coming from the academics, think tankers, and research institutions, followed by the private sector. Last year's biggest affiliation group came from the government. In terms of age distribution, I would say it is more or less the same. The largest group remain the people within the 21 to 35 years old age group. There was an increase in the number of youths from 18 in the age group of 18 to 21. It increased from 5.7 to 7.4%, and the over 60s also increased from 5.9 to 6.7%. Before I go into the main discussion, I want to welcome our moderator and discussants who will be taking the discussion forward. Mr. Choi Shing Kwok is our Director and CEO, and he'll be moderating the panel discussion this morning. We have Professor Tommy Koh, Ambassador at Large at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore. I believe Professor Koh needs no further introduction, but you might like to know also that he is the Emeritus Professor of Law at NUS, as well as the Chairman of the International Advisory Panel for the Centre for International Law at NUS. Mr. Shivshankar Menon is the former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of India and the current chair of the Ashoka Centre for China Studies, as well as visiting professor at the Ashoka University in India. Ms. Wendy Cutler is Vice President at the Asia Society Policy Institute and the Managing Director of its Washington, D.C. office. And Professor Chen Dongxiao is President and Senior Research Fellow of the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies. Now, going into this program, I'd like to tell you that there are 4 main sections of the report that we will focus on in the webinar. And of course, the report is more than 4 sections. I will present the key findings of each section and then turn the floor over to the panel to share their comments and insights before we proceed to the next. And then the final 30 minutes of the event will be reserved for our online audience to participate in the Q&A. I would like to ask that our panelists please turn on your cameras so that we can take a photo before we start. Okay, I think this should be good enough time. I will put back the slides and we will start. Okay, so the first section is on the regional outlook and views of international development. And one of the questions that we ask every year to our respondents are, what are the top 3 challenges you see facing Southeast Asia? And in this question, the unemployment and economic recessionary fears dominated in the top 3, with 59.5% saying that it's impacting them. And the second top ranked factor was the intense weather events that people were experiencing in the region. At third place, at 41.9%, we have widening social economic income disparity gaps. And it's also tied at first place the fear of increased military tensions arising from potential flashpoints, such as the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the Korean Peninsula. Here, in terms of our top weightage of unemployment and economic recession, Indonesia gave a much higher weightage compared to the regional average. Indonesia's weightage was 70.2%. And on the climate threat, it is no surprise that the Philippines say that it is their biggest threat at 76.8%, again, much higher than the regional average, ahead of recessionary fears. Philippines tends to get the worst of the impacts of typhoons and cyclones. Brunei and Vietnam also expressed strongest worries about security threats arising from potential flashpoints. The second question that we ask is their top concerns about ASEAN. And here you can see 82.6% say that ASEAN is slow and ineffective and unable to cope with the fluid political situation. This is an increase of 12.5 percentage points from last year. And this sense of ASEAN being reactive to external developments is felt strongest by Vietnam at 93.4% and Singapore at 89.9%. These 2 countries rank this above the regional average. And the second fear expressed by our respondents is that ASEAN is becoming an arena of major power competition, and the fear that some of its member states may become major power proxies. This is an increase of 11.5 percentage points over last year, and this is the top fear for Cambodia. Perhaps this is related to the external pressures felt by Cambodia in 2022 as the ASEAN chair. And the third ranked concern here is that ASEAN is becoming increasingly disunited. 60.7% of respondents feel this way. And again, this is an increase of 12.5 percentage point. And in this concern, Myanmar is the most critical of ASEAN's disunity. Now, talking about Myanmar, we asked the question to ask people to choose the statement that best reflects their view about ASEAN's five-point consensus. You do know that ASEAN has developed the 5-point consensus since 2021 as a guiding document to resolve the conflict in Myanmar. So a third of respondents are actually neutral about the 5-point consensus, with 41.8% of Singaporeans viewing the problem that the problem is not with the 5-point consensus itself, but that the junta's intransigence is a problem, and this is double the regional average at 21.7%. So the third ranked statement is that the 5-point consensus is fundamentally flawed in addressing complex issues at 19.6%. And interestingly, Myanmar chose this as its top choice. The other choices that came in at a small minority is that the 5-point consensus exposes ASEAN's disunity, and the last one that at 13.5% is that it is the most suitable option under these circumstances. Now, on the point of neutrality about the 5-point consensus, the countries that doubled its regional average were Laos at 61.7%, Cambodia at 56%, and Brunei at 48.3%. So interestingly, these countries were all either immediate past or future ASEAN chairs. We also asked our respondents what ASEAN should do to move the Myanmar issue forward. And in here, we gave 5 options. And the top option that was chosen was that by 38.1% of respondents was to see ASEAN engage in independent dialogue with all the key stakeholders in Myanmar, including with the National Unity Government. And this is an marginal increase by 0.3%. Another 18% want to see ASEAN utilize harder methods such as suspension or sanctions to curtail the State Administration Council, with the Indonesians presenting this the strongest view at 24%. And then another 15.2% chose the non-interference option, and this is very much preferred by 47% of Cambodians and 43% of Lao respondents. Moving on, we posed new questions this year on the Taiwan Strait and the potential of an outbreak of hostilities. In here, we gave 5 options, and a large proportion of respondents at 43.3%, the yellow bar here, believe that such an event will destabilize the region. And this sentiment is shared by 7 ASEAN countries except Brunei, Myanmar, and Thailand. The second ranked impact is that 28.7% fear that ASEAN countries will be forced to take sides. And this is the top concern for Myanmar at 45.2% and Thailand at 41.7%. The third ranked reason, the bar in purple, is that 15.5% believe that such an event will reduce economic cooperation with either China or Taiwan. Interestingly, this is the #1 concern of Brunei respondents at 39.2%. Still delving deeper into this Taiwan question, we asked, what should your country do if conflict breaks out in the Taiwan Strait? So you see here that a large group of respondents at 45.6%, the yellow bar, believe that their governments should oppose the use of force via diplomatic measures. And all countries except for Brunei, Cambodia, and Laos chose this as their top option. Another third, at 33.5%, wants to adopt a neutral position. Brunei, Cambodia, and Laos made it their top choice. And for the others, showing support for China, in fact, is not an option for Indonesia, Philippines, or Vietnam respondents. It was not recorded at all. And in terms of showing military support for Taiwan, we see here that 20.2% of Philippines respondents will support facilitating military support for Taiwan. In which case, we believe that an outbreak of conflict will impact the Philippines just by sheer proximity alone. One of the biggest events to happen last year was the invasion of Ukraine led by Russia. And we asked this question, how concerned were our respondents about Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Now, nearly half of them, at 47.9%, say they were very concerned. And of this group, 53.6% majority who say so have civil society, NGO, or media affiliations. Philippine respondents were the highest at the country level at 71.7%, followed by Brunei at 64.2% and Indonesia at 61.2%. Another third, 35% of our respondents said that they were somewhat concerned, whereas 12.3% said that they were neutral, and other smaller minorities said that they were not very concerned at 2.7% or not at all concerned at 2.2%. In this question, the Lao respondents were most neutral at 36.4%. The follow-up question to the Russia-Ukraine invasion was, what do they see as the most serious impacts of the invasion on Southeast Asia? And here you see that nearly half, more than half, 58.3%, say that the increase in energy and food prices is impacting them the most. And this is led by Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. The second greatest impact, the color in green, 25.9%, that is about a quarter, say that the erosion of trust in a rules-based order and the violation of national sovereignty was important to them. And this sentiment is shared by 40.9% of Singapore and 32.4% of Vietnam, above the regional average. So interestingly, more Brunei respondents worry that the impact of Russia's invasion is that it will increase divisions within ASEAN, then that it would erode trust in a rules-based order. Moving on, we polled our respondents on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, or IPEF. Now, the IPEF was launched in May 2022 with 14 countries, you see on the slide here. And when we asked what the likely overall impact and effectiveness would be, 46.5% say that it will be positive, 41.8% say that they were not sure, and another 11.7% perceive it negatively. So amongst those who perceive it most positively would be Brunei at 68.3%, followed by the Philippines, 58.6%, and Vietnam at 55.9%. And the perceived negative impact here in red was largest in Singapore at 16.8%, followed by Malaysia, 15.3%, and Indonesia at 13.2%. And interestingly, these are all the ASEAN IPEF countries. The remaining countries, those who were not sure, tended to be more non-IPEF countries. We also asked, delving a little deeper into the reasons why they felt it was positive. The top reason given was that the IPEF demonstrates the US's commitment to be economically engaged in this region, and this is shared by 31.3% of respondents. So the strongest proponents of this view that the IPEF demonstrates US commitment came from Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The second reason is that it shows complementarity with existing ASEAN initiatives, and this is shared by 30.4% of respondents. The respondents who tended to agree with this second option came mostly from Brunei, Cambodia, who is a non-IPEF partner, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, and these countries demonstrated higher than regional average numbers. The third reason was that it would value add to bilateral relations with the US. This is shared by 24.3% across the region. Non-IPEF partners such as Laos and Myanmar scored the highest for this option. We also had to ask why they thought it would be negative. The top reason given was that there will be an increase in US-China competition at 33.9%. And this is more pronounced in countries like Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. The second reason was that the IPEF did not give their countries market access. And this perception ranked at 28.4%, but it was highest in Thailand, followed by Indonesia and Brunei. The third reason given was that the IPEF could be a reason to accelerate the US-China decoupling process. And here, about a quarter of our respondents who chose negative say that. And this is most notable in Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia. As we mentioned earlier, there was a proportion over 41% of respondents who said that they were not sure about the IPEF. And of course, we had to ask why. The top reason given by most of the respondents in this category was that it really depended on what emerges from the ongoing negotiations of the 4 IPEF pillars, which are trade, supply chains, clean energy, and tax and anti-corruption. And this sentiment is most common in the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. The second top reason was that there was little information given to them to assess IPEF's impacts. And this sentiment varies from 17.9% in Brunei to 32% in Thailand and 34% in Vietnam. Another smaller group just say that they are not interested in it at all. And this group of respondents mainly came from the non-IPEF countries, which are Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. I will stop here and hand over the time to Mr. Choi for the discussion.
Thank you very much. The way I will do this is for this particular section, I will actually have just 2 rounds of the panels to respond. And in each round, I will ask 2 questions, which I'll direct to individual speakers on the panel. So I think we could see from what Sharon had briefed us that there are 2 categories of concerns that Southeast Asians have. One is more regarding Southeast Asia's own abilities to cope with various things like economic recession, climate change, and also rising military tensions, as well as the organization itself being able to be agile. So I would like to seek a response on that from actually Professor Tommy Koh. But before you do that, I also like to pose a second question, which is on the concerns about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, that one, I think we have seen from the results that it causes concerns in areas such as increase in food and energy prices, erosion in the rules-based order, and also, of course, accelerating the divisions within ASEAN. So for this question, I would like to ask all the other respondents, other than Professor Koh, how well they thought ASEAN had responded to the Ukraine crisis. Of course, this changed over time, but you can talk about overall, and whether this response has in any way helps to preserve ASEAN's credibility. So perhaps I'd like Tommy Koh to go first, and then after that, we'll follow with Shivshankar, Wendy, and Professor Chen. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shing Kwok. I would like to focus on the economic concerns. I would say that in general, these concerns are shared by people in other parts of the world. However, one of the concerns, the fear of recession, is misplaced. I will explain. The ASEAN countries, individually and collectively, have actually done well. They succeeded in balancing the need to protect lives with the need to protect jobs. And when it was, as soon as it was possible, they removed the COVID-19 restrictions and opened up the economy. As a result, I would say that in a dismal world, ASEAN is a bright spot. The ADB has estimated that in 2023, the group as a whole will grow by about 4.6%, which compared to other parts of the world is a very good number. Yeah.
Thank you. You're finished, Tommy? Yeah.
You want me to continue?
If do you have any response to the concerns that respondents have regarding ASEAN as an organization?
Yeah, I was actually very surprised by the perceptions of ASEAN as ineffective and slow and so on, you know. ASEAN, unlike the European Union, is an intergovernmental organization. It's a community of 10 sovereign countries, which are very diverse, have different interests. And our policy is always to consult and to arrive at a consensus. And this takes time. So sometimes it may appear to be slow, but the slowness is required by the process of consultation and consensus making. I would defend ASEAN and say, on the whole, ASEAN has not been slow. We responded very rapidly to the COVID-19 crisis. We adopted an ASEAN Comprehensive Economic Recovery Framework, which have helped to facilitate the recovery of the economies of the region. On Myanmar, as soon as the military seized power on the 1st of February, we convened a leaders meeting in Jakarta, which adopted the 5-point consensus. So I would defend ASEAN and say that the perception that we are slow, we are ineffective, we are unable to respond quickly to new development is an unfair perception.
Thank you. Now let's shift the lens to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and maybe Shivshankar. Yes, your response.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my opinion, actually, as Ambassador Koh said, ASEAN has responded very well to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's borne and mitigated the economic consequences probably better than most of the rest of the world, if you look at the numbers and the prospect for 2023. Its political responses have been restrained. And that's probably just as well, given the situation, the intent of the combatants, direct, indirect. There's really little that third parties can do to solve the issue or to end the conflict. And just to add, I'm not sure I understand the concern about ASEAN's capability. These are tough times, but ASEAN has a very good track record of changing and adapting to tough times. In fact, it was formed in difficult circumstances and adapted to each subsequent geopolitical shift and change. Post-Vietnam War, China-US rapprochement, now China-US rivalry, unipolar moment, end of the Cold War. Each time ASEAN adjusted. The global slowdown, economic slowdown. So I assume that in these tough times, ASEAN will change and evolve again. And I think that's what we're seeing happening around us.
Thank you. Wendy?
Well, I'm going to be a bit more negative here with respect to the response to the Ukraine. I think the word that you all used in your survey was like a tepid response by ASEAN to the invasion of Ukraine. I'd use the word weak or lackluster, particularly the initial response when, in our view, all ASEAN can do is kind of express concern. Now, I think the response strengthened over time, particularly during the summit meeting when the foreign minister of the Ukraine was invited and the treaty on amity and cooperation was signed. But I think this gets into the other question about ASEAN, is it slow and effective? And your survey reveals that at least a lot of respondents feel that it is, and it's not as effective or as responsive as it should be. And in many respects, I think that is borne by the response to the invasion of Ukraine. There are a lot of different views among different ASEAN members on the invasion of Ukraine that was demonstrated in your survey. And I think that's what kind of leads to kind of a lowest common denominator response among the ASEAN countries to really thorny, difficult political issues. I'm not saying that's unique because any group of sovereign countries have a hard time coming together on really difficult issues. But I think ASEAN is struggling here.
Thank you. Chen Dongxiao.
Wendy, you have to appreciate that unlike the European Union, ASEAN doesn't have a common foreign and security policy. On foreign policy, each member state of ASEAN decides for itself. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that soon after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, on the 2nd of March 2022, 8 of the 10 ASEAN countries voted for the UN General Assembly resolution condemning the invasion. Only 2 countries abstained, Vietnam and Laos. But as I say, we always find a way to arrive at a consensus. And in order to carry Vietnam and Laos together with the rest of us, we had to accommodate them and find a language that Vietnam and Laos can live with. That's why you say our initial joint statement was tepid. It had to be tepid, otherwise there'll be no statement at all. So there was a choice for the majority of us, should we go for a tepid statement or no statement? And some of us said, if we cannot get a strong statement, let's not have a common statement. Others said, no, ASEAN will look very bad in the world if we have no common statement.
Thank you. Before Wendy respond, Professor Chen Dongxiao, your view, please.
Well, I think that the Ukraine crisis itself is one of the biggest events last year, which have split the world even further apart. I think the world has already seen a lot of divisions along those 40 lines, geo-economic, geopolitical, or even geotechnological areas. So my understanding, my observation is ASEAN's countries' response to Ukraine in general have reflected its balance of threefold concerns. One is overall international stability based upon the United Nations Charter and international law, which international community as a whole have unanimously accepted and committed to observe. Two is ASEAN members of various interests related to the Eurasia, including its various its members' economic relationship, energy ties with Russia. Third is ASEAN as a whole and the member states in particular, their relationship with Moscow and Washington, generically speaking. So obviously, ASEAN countries are worried about instability and multiple damaging and disruptive impacts on international energy and food supply. However, ASEAN members need to strike a balance, a delicate balance above mentioned threefold concerns. So we have seen that there has been no unified or uniform reaction of ASEAN countries to Ukraine crisis. Singapore is visibly different from the other ASEAN countries in terms of its sanction on Moscow. And some of ASEAN members are more sympathetic towards Moscow with different degrees. So this divisiveness and the differences within ASEAN is understandable, reflecting ASEAN's current status and dilemmas.
Thank you. Wendy, do you have a brief response to Tommy's explanation of ASEAN?
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I have enormous respect for what Tommy said. I'm looking at this from the outside and I'm just trying to be honest. The word tepid did not come from me. It's lifted right from the survey. That's how you all characterize the response. And I would just underscore that I did use the word initial, that over time the response strengthened. And I have enormous appreciation for how hard it is to reach consensus among, any more than one country.
Thank you. Now, to throw a few more of the issues that were in the first part of the survey results into the mix now in our conversation, I'm going to go to the second round, which focuses on slightly different issues, but of course it's still on the subject of the geopolitical environment. And those two questions I'd like to pose have to do with the Taiwan Straits, the tension that is there, and it being really one of the potential flashpoints in the region, which many respondents in the survey do have a concern that it will destabilize the region. Almost half of them feel that that is the case. And more than a quarter were afraid that ASEAN countries would be forced to take sides in such an eventuality where there is a conflict that breaks out in Taiwan. So I would like to ask our panelists. What do you think ASEAN's response should be? Perhaps Professor Chen Dongxiao can be the one to answer that from his perspective. And then I could ask Shivshankar and Tommy, what do you think the international community's response should be? That means not just ASEAN, but the rest of the world, and of course, the rest of the world also seeing ASEAN's response. Let me couple that with another issue that was in the cluster of presentation that Sharon gave, and that is on the issue of the economic initiative that has been launched by the US, the IPEF, and in this particular survey, which comes really only 7 to 8 months after IPEF had been launched, there was a large number of respondents who were unsure what to make of IPEF because they thought they should just wait and see what happens in the negotiations, or they should just wait for information gaps to be filled. So if Wendy, you were the advisor to the trade representative of the US, Catherine Tai, what would be your recommendation to try to move these people who are sitting on the fence towards supporting IPEF? All right, so perhaps we'll again kind of go with Professor Chen first. He was the last round. Now he'll be the first. Then we'll go to Shivshankar, Tommy, and Wendy. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think that regarding the situation across Taiwan Strait, just as the survey has indicated that it has caused ASEAN countries rising concerns. I think that the tensions across Taiwan Strait are on the rise in the past few years, obviously, and it's still on the rise. Since Ms. Tai and the DPP came to power in Taiwan, and in the years of Trump administration. The general situation across Taiwan Strait has been in, as I observed, is in a negative and a spiral down dynamic between and among the Beijing, Washington, and the Taipei. Whether or not the tensions will inevitably lead up to a conflicts of military confrontations will depend upon how much efforts spent on to reverse the momentum of this negative and spiral down dynamic among all three parties, including the confidence or trust building or reassurance between Beijing and the Taipei, and between Beijing and Washington. All three sides, I think, particular from my observation, particular Taipei and Washington, need to be particularly cautious and prudent about its policy and behavior in the years ahead. Situation of Taiwan Strait also, very vividly reflect the fragile status of bilateral relationship between Beijing and Washington. Regarding to the question about how ASEAN countries should respond, if I put myself in the shoes of ASEAN members countries, I think two steps probably ASEAN countries will take, and maybe have already taken. One is to pursue a more active diplomacy, including to tap ASEAN's convening capacity, the so-called convening power, to bring concerned parties together to have a direct talk. And we have seen such kind of cases before. And I think that Beijing I believe Beijing will value the convening power in the future. Second one is necessary risk reducing or minimizing measures to maintain ASEAN's resilience in its economy, in the various economic development of various countries, ASEAN countries, against the backdrop of a changing and uncertain global and regional supply chain. So I think that we have already seen signs of those diversion of investment and manufacturing or assemblies transition. So I think that these two steps, at least, I think, will be quite legitimate and reasonable steps ASEAN countries would take. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Shiv, would like to talk about the international community?
Well, it seems to me that if there were a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, the international response will be very different from what it is to, say, Ukraine, or in other cases, because even purely in geopolitical terms, not just economic, conflict over Taiwan would be an issue not of local order, of local European order in the Ukrainian case, but one involving the dynamic heart of the world economy and a geopolitical cockpit where all the major powers have significant interests, where 4 nuclear weapon states and 2 possibly recessed nuclear weapon states are in close proximity with conflicting interests. So, you know, if you look at Ukraine, for instance, that conflict, the Russian invasion, exacerbated economic and other trends that were already there before the Russian invasion. Global economic slowdown, rising food, energy prices, etc., US-Russian tensions, the divisions that Professor Chen mentioned. Conflict over Taiwan would create a whole new set of crises, whether in the semiconductor industry and other economic parts, but more important, whatever the outcome, whoever wins, it would determine the survival of regimes in major or superpowers. It would change geopolitical control of one of the world's most important waterways and the entire Indo-Pacific. So this would not remain just a proxy war fought through surrogates, respecting certain limits to escalation, particularly nuclear, as Ukraine has done so far. So for me, this is a prospect that we really need all to work together to avoid. And I think the concerns that were expressed in the survey are legitimate. And I would argue that yes, ASEAN does have a role in helping us to actually make sure that this worst case scenario does not come about.
Thank you. Tommy? Yeah, you're muted.
I'm muted.
Yeah.
I want to say to Wendy and to Dongxiao that from the point of view of ASEAN, the relationship between your two countries is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And what the ASEAN country want is for your relationship to be stable and constructive. At the moment, it is neither stable nor constructive. There's a complete absence of strategic trust between Washington and Beijing, and this worries us. Our nightmare scenario is that accidentally or intentionally, there will be a clash between the United States and China over Taiwan. And I agree with Shivshankar that this cannot be a limited war. It probably will not be a conventional war. It has the potential to be the Third World War, and it will not just destroy the two countries involved, but it will destabilize the whole region and the whole world. So all of us have a stake in helping the United States and China to maintain a stable and constructive relationship. Dongxiao said we should use our convening power. We're already doing that. We bring the United States and China together in the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit. We are encouraging them to talk to each other and to begin by working together on climate change, environment, and so on, to begin a process of rebuilding trust. But we, the outsider, can only do so much. At the end of the day, it depends on the dynamics of the relationship between Washington and Beijing.
Thank you. So Wendy, you would like to go from that to IPATH, which is economic part of this rivalry between the two sides. Yes.
Yeah, and just a comment.
Can I invite Wendy to respond to our discussion on Taiwan?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just going to just quickly comment on your last comment about the need to stabilize the relationship between Washington and Beijing. And I think there was a serious effort made by the leaders of both countries to try and stabilize the relationship when they met on the margins of the G20. And that was going to set into motion a series of engagements. Unfortunately, we've had what we're calling now in the United States the so-called balloon incident, which is really capturing so much attention, and in Washington, particularly from the opponents to the Biden administration. And so, no one knows how long, this incident is going to be capturing people's attentions. I think that the good news is that when Secretary Blinken said he wasn't going to visit Beijing, he did not cancel his trip. He postponed his trip. And I think the US statement was very carefully crafted. And I also think the Chinese statement was carefully crafted to kind of, in a relatively moderate tone. The question is, can both sides keep the temperature down on this recent development? It's unclear now, so we're going to have to see how it unfolds. But again, I think the two leaders, as of last October, also recognized the need to try and set a floor to the relationship, establish guardrails, and increase communication and engagement, so unintended incidents, don't lead to other developments that can spiral out of control.
Wendy, can I say something to you? When I look at the reaction of the American people to this balloon, I feel worried. I think there's a hysteria in America about China. And this makes rational thinking and rational policy making very difficult. This really worries me. And there's a competition now between the Democrats and Republicans to see who can bash China more, and this is a very unhealthy situation. So I really am very, very worried about US-China relationship on both sides. I think that I don't know how. I want to ask Dongxiao. Dongxiao, how can you sabotage Antony Blinken's forthcoming visit to Beijing by putting up this stupid balloon?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I agree with both of you, Wendy and Tommy, that your points about maintaining a very effective professional line for communication against this backdrop of those accidents, as both of you have said, that is accidents. And I think that how to handle it in a professional and diplomatic way is very important. But what makes me concerned is that there's a hype up of those story and totally reject Beijing's explanation about its nature of civilian usage airship. I think that at least it will even further exacerbate the already very sensitive and vulnerable situation and the very low level of trust in two sides. And I think it's quite easier for Beijing to see that whether it is just those hawkish forces, those anti-China or anti-CPP forces in Washington try to derail the already concerted efforts on both sides to try to resume those dialogue. And whether those forces, including the DOD, I mean the military people in Washington, because of their concerns about their military budget, or they are going to have all those military industrial complex who are more interested in to hype up those kind of attention. So I think that this is also a legitimate concerns and narratives in Beijing or in China. So I think that I'm quite worried about that. Of course, I would also suggest that Beijing should do more to reach out with Washington as well as others to make those issues more clearly. All right, as long as it's a civilian balloon, as Beijing said, why not we should do for instance, a joint investigation about that, rather than, I think nowadays the concern is as long as the balloon has been shut down, and the DOD and military people in the United States said that it is your assessment now already, and you are going to do some investigation. So I think that this makes things even much more complicated to resolve. I'll stop here.
Okay, brief response, Wendy, on that, and then please go on to the IPAF also briefly, please.
Okay,
yeah.
So I did not come here to have a debate on the balloon incident. I think I could respond to every argument you just made and turn it on its head. But I just prefer to move to IPAF right now and to the other areas in the survey and the objective of this webinar. And maybe you want to organize another one where experts can come in and have this discussion. So IPAF. I was a bit surprised that support for IPAF was below 50% by the respondents, because at the same time, in another part of your survey, over 2/3 of the respondents welcome increased U.S. economic influence in the region. I don't know if they're contradictory, but they don't really seem, those two findings don't seem terribly aligned to me. I think the struggle with IPAF is that folks understand what a free trade agreement is and FTA is. And we've come to the region with a new model, and we've discussed it at a very, very high level. We're looking to establish resilient supply chains, and we're looking, to help with the clean energy transition. And we haven't really been able to get to that next level of detail to really explain what we're seeking, and also to explain the benefits and incentives that will be embodied in this initiative that in some ways could alleviate concerns of the lack of market access. But just to be positive, I think with time, and particularly before the next round of the IPAF negotiations, by then we will have tabled all of our text in all of the areas. And I think once we do that, we'll be in a better position to really explain to everyone what we're seeking and what benefits and incentives will be included in the initiative. But clearly, the United States has work to do. And I would just underscore, the administration's been very careful in this initiative to be very affirmative, very positive, to answer to the concerns and priorities of the partners. It's not an anti-China initiative. The word China's not in this initiative. When Sharon, when you put forward the 3 top concerns of the ASEAN region, it had to do with economic growth, climate change, income inequality. Those issues, I think, are all going to be captured in this initiative. And I don't think that's an accident. I think this administration is doing a much better job in listening and appreciating Southeast Asia on its own merits and not in the context of the U.S.-China rivalry.
Thank you, Wendy. I think the result that you mentioned actually is in Sharon's next section, which when she presents, I think she will help to clarify on that. Yeah, and perhaps that can be where we go next, because we are very, very short of time.
Can I do a brief response to Wendy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Wendy asked whether there's a contradiction between a great majority of the responding welcoming U.S. economic engagement in the region with a very lukewarm response to IPAF I want to say there's no contradiction. IPEF is a disappointment to many people in the region because it doesn't contain the one thing the Asian countries value. Asian countries live by trade, and for them, a free trade agreement without market access is no free trade agreement at all. IPEF is not meant to be a free trade agreement. And I think the major shortcoming of IPEF is that it doesn't give market access. But I want to make a bigger point to Wendy. I think we are very disappointed that the Biden administration has essentially continued Trump's economic and trade policy. This is a source of great disappointment to the region.
Okay, perhaps we'll leave it there. Sharon, please bring us to the next section. Thank you.
Very interesting discussion. But we'll move on now to the next section on major powers, regional influence, and leadership. We have a bit of ground to cover, so I'll go quickly, but enough time for you to digest. One of the questions that we ask every year is which country or regional organization is the most influential economic power in Southeast Asia. And here it's no surprise, China is still regarded as the most influential economic power at 59.9%. It is the yellow bar here. Although its influence declined significantly from 76.7% last year, following the strict COVID-related mobility restrictions that we saw. And then the second one, the second most voted is ASEAN. So we see here that ASEAN's economic influence actually increased from 7.6% to 15%. And this perception is most pronounced in Laos, where they showed us a more than tenfold increase in the perception of ASEAN. The United States gained ground from 9.8% to 10.5%, but it fell to third placing this year. And its influence gained significant recognition from Malaysia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. Just to add on, the United States was actually second place last year. And here, the next question follow-up to this one was what is their view of this economic power's influence on their country? And here we see the region continues to express worry about China's regional economic influence at 64.5% here. Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam respondents have greater concerns about China's economic rise. But the majority of respondents welcome ASEAN and the US's economic influence at 60.9% and 65.7% respectively. But we do note that there is an increasing number of countries that have expressed some worry about ASEAN's economic influence compared to 2022. In the next question, we ask them which country or regional organization has the most influential political and strategic power in Southeast Asia. Again, China, the yellow bar here, is the most influential in terms of the political and strategic power at 41.5%, and it is followed by the US at 31.9% and ASEAN at 13.5%. Sorry, that's a mistake, 13.5%. The perception of Chinese influence declined significantly from 54.4% last year to 41.5%. And the decrease mainly came from Laos at minus 44.2% and from Myanmar at minus 30.9%. An increasing number of Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, and Singapore, are choosing the US over China. In the follow-up here, are they worried or do they welcome this political power's influence on their country? Again, the expression is that they are generally worried about China's growing regional political and strategic influence at 68.5%, and this is down from 76.4% last year. Brunei at 94.4% and Cambodia 47.4% has shown the greatest acceptance of China's political strategic influence. And again, similar to past trends, respondents welcome ASEAN's and the US's growing influence at 59.7% and 55.8% respectively. But they do express some caution about ASEAN's and the US's influence in their countries. We ask this question every year on who they have most confidence in to champion the global free trade agenda. Here we see that the region's confidence in ASEAN's leadership has actually soared from 15.5% to 23.5%. So it's put ASEAN in top place this year. The significant increase in support for ASEAN's economic leadership actually came from Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, and Singapore. This could be due to the entry into force of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, and the diversification of production sites away from China to Southeast Asia. Both China and US experienced a drop in ranking. So the US dropped from first place last year to second place, and China dropped from second place to fourth place this year. China saw a reduction in confidence from Cambodia and Laos, whereas the US experienced a considerable loss of confidence from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, even though it launched the IPEF with these countries. Another question that we ask every year is who they saw as providing the leadership to maintain the rules-based order and uphold international law. In this question, the US came up tops at 27.1%, although it suffered a decline from 36.6%. The EU is now at second place. Last year, it ranked 16.6%, and this year it's at 23%. Now, ASEAN's position actually declined from second place to third place, despite a gain of 4.2% percentage point. And China's rating fell significantly from 13.6% to 5.3% here. It is this purple line here. And the biggest drop in confidence towards China came from Cambodia, where it dropped from 65.4% to 2.2%. And this might be due to the consequences of China's no-limits partnership with Russia and the failure to condemn Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. And with regards to the surprising finding about Cambodia, Cambodia itself experienced a drastic shift in positions when PM Hun Sen himself criticized the invasion, despite Phnom Penh's ties with Moscow. We asked the question on the strengthening of the Quad this year. And here we have a majority of 50.4% of respondents who say that they agree or strongly agree that the strengthening of the minilateral group will be constructive for the region. And this view is supported by Brunei, Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand and Vietnam. Only 12.2% disagree or strongly disagree. This is a slight decrease from 13.1% last year. And the number of neutral respondents has actually increased from 28.5% to 37.4%, with Cambodia and Laos forming the majority. We asked our respondents what were the impacts arising from cooperation with the Quad. And you can see here from the area chart that the biggest group at 37.8% feel that cooperation will actually be complementary to ASEAN's own efforts. And the majority of the views came from Indonesia and Vietnam. 31% feel that the region will benefit from the cooperation, and this is the top choice for Lao respondents. And for those who are less optimistic, we have 13.9% who say that the Quad will threaten ASEAN centrality and compete with ASEAN-led mechanisms such as the ARF or the EAS. And here, 10.4%, a small minority, feel that the Quad may force countries to choose sides. Another 6.8% fear that the Quad will provoke China. Moving on to other new initiatives, and this time this is led by China. Here, just to explain, the Global Security Initiative the GSI was proposed by China also last year in 2022 to promote common and sustainable security. And it focuses on the principle of indivisible security by opposing the pursuit of security at the expense of others and rejecting group or bloc confrontations. Here we have, when you look at the colors in red and orange, 44.5% in total expressed little or no confidence that the GSI will benefit the region. Another 27.4%, which is the total of those who chose confident or very confident, say that they were confident that GSI would benefit Southeast Asia. And these views tend to be more pronounced among the respondents from Brunei and Cambodia. Of course, we had to ask why they thought the GSI will or will not benefit the region. In the group that said that they were confident or very confident, 32.8%, about a third, are of the view that it will complement other security initiatives in the region. Another 30% feel that it will promote a balance of power in the region. About a quarter say that the GSI principles are positive and reassuring. In the camp that say that the GSI will not benefit the region, the top concern is that there's a potential to increase tensions between the US and China, and here a third of those respondents believe so. And this is followed very closely with the perennial concern that ASEAN will be forced to choose sides. Another third say so. The third rank reason, albeit at the lower percentage ranking at 17.3%, is that the GSI will disrupt the international rules-based order. And I will stop here for the panel discussion to take place.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And in view of the time, which is very much catching up on us very quickly, I'm just do one round of questions for this section. So I'd like to just focus on the first couple of questions, which had to do with the most influential economic and political strategic power in the region. So we had China continuing to be in the pole position for both of those, but with lesser overall support than in previous years. Perhaps Prof. Chen and Wendy could comment on what they think the reasons are behind this and whether there are any implications. And on the US, which came in third place for the economic front and second in the political and strategic front, could I ask Tommy and Shivshankar to comment on what they think ASEAN's playbook should be given this, and how would they best respond to competition for influence in the region. So first, Chen Dongxiao, and then after that, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the first and the most immediate reasons are, I could think in my mind, for ASEAN members' perception of China's declining influences, both in economic and the political, geopolitical, geostrategic domain in this area, is the COVID policy of China, which until the end of last year, before Beijing's big shift, and before this survey has been conducted, I think has greatly constrained the exchange of visits and in-person meetings between the China and ASEAN countries, including 3 years hiatus from the normal business communities, in-person meetings, activities between two sides, and also a larger number of Chinese tourists supposed to travel to Southeast Asian countries. So just recall that back in the 2019, the direct flights number every week between the China and ASEAN is about 4,500, 4,500, and the people traveling each other's are more than 65 million a year. So I think that even bilateral trade in the past few years have still on the quick rise, according to China's official data between two sides. But I think the perception is quite negative and frustrating. And the second reason, I think, is perhaps is related to the growing active engagement or re-engagement of great major powers with this region, including the United States, Japan, EU, and even, I think, India. So even if there are still many people here not certain whether Washington's new initiatives, such as the IPF, would be positive for the region as a whole, as survey has found. The general trend of rising proactive presence at and engagement or re-engagement with the region economically and politically from many other major powers have further thrown Beijing's less visibility into a sharp relief. So I expect that the shift of Beijing's COVID policy at home would help change this dynamic. So the overall implications on the region would be quite complicated. My personal view is Beijing's main concerns about its relationship with ASEAN in the past decades are quite persistent and stable, namely to maintain a robust economic, political, and security partnership with ASEAN, to support ASEAN's unity and centrality in regional economic and political architecture building. And I think that since the Beijing and Washington's relationship has been increasingly constrained, Beijing would be more welcome and value ASEAN's convening power to bring Beijing and Washington together on those multilateral occasions. Thank you.
Wendy.
So just a couple of comments here. First of all, I noted in the survey, while China's influence has gone down, I believe for every other country and for ASEAN, their influence has gone up. So it's not just the United States, it's all the other countries as well, some by, a much smaller percentage, others by a larger percentage. I agree with Professor Chen. Part of this has to do with the fact that China was locked down for a good part of the year, was also focused on domestic politics in the 20th Party Congress. But also, the slowdown in the Chinese economy was not just due to COVID, the lockdowns that had something to do with it. I think over time, we're going to see slower growth in China, which I think is going to lead ASEAN to look for other partners and other markets. And ASEAN's also benefiting from, shifting supply chains as well. And at the same time, I think that China was inward focused this year. The United States was really stepping up its activities in Southeast Asia, both businesses and the government. I mean, the president attended the ASEAN summit. Cabinet officers have been visiting different countries in ASEAN throughout the year. And so I think it's only natural that the US went up and China went down. I mean, the question will be what next year's statistics will reveal here. But I would also be remiss if I just didn't note, I do think that we cannot discount the a concern about Chinese influence in the region due to their activities in the South China Sea and some economic coercive practices as well.
Thank you. Over to Tommy on ASEAN's playbook in this situation.
Okay, I want to make 2 points. First, I have a point for Wendy. In the competition for influence in Southeast Asia between the United States and China, China is a clear winner by a broad margin. So my message to you and to Washington is you have to work harder to increase your influence and power, both economically and politically in the region. My second point is that ASEAN would like to see a balance of power in the region. ASEAN does not wish to be dominated by any one country, whether it be China or some other country. At the moment, China has too much influence in the region, and the United States too little influence. So I want to see a better balance between these two great powers.
Shivshankar?
To the question, what should ASEAN do given China-US rivalry? Well, I think ASEAN's done well so far by both balancing and hedging at the same time, and by not choosing sides. And China-US competition certainly opens up space for other powers. But if you want some unsolicited advice, could ASEAN do more? Yes. Most powers operate on a fairly hierarchical view of the world and international order. Most people do. We don't like to admit it. So how do you get taken seriously? the bigger you can make yourself, the more unity of purpose, action on issues in the region, the better. I mean, something like, as we said, China, ASEAN's convening power. Why not do Myanmar proximity talks with all those involved, including the powers, even on South China Sea? For me, I think both China and the US will take ASEAN more seriously with a more united, more active ASEAN, forward-looking ASEAN political and strategic stance. And so, because I think so far that ability that ASEAN has maybe is not fully exercised. I'm sure that countries like India, third countries like India and the others would welcome such ASEAN activism and would be happy to see ASEAN taking the lead on these kinds of political issues, Myanmar, etc., South China Sea and so on.
Thank you very much. And maybe just to conclude this section, because we are really running out of time. I think there was one statistic that Sharon pointed out, which was I think what Wendy was referring to, about 2/3 of respondents welcoming the US. Actually, that statistic was a subset of those who chose the US as the highest, the biggest power. So it is not a set of the entire 1,000 plus respondents. So perhaps that is just a brief explanation. So Sharon, take us to the third section, and then we will of course come back to any issues if they arise in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like our panelists have actually already gone on ahead, because the next section we're going to talk about is the US-China rivalry and its impact on Southeast Asia. So in this question, we ask, ASEAN is now caught in the crossfire in the competition for influence and leadership. So how should ASEAN best respond? And our respondents continue to favor the proactive approach of enhancing ASEAN's resilience and unity to fend off pressures from the two major powers. And this is by the largest group of respondents at 45.5%. And then the preference for traditional option of not choosing sides has actually slightly increased from 26.6% last year to 30.5%. And then the third option, which is to seek out third parties to broaden its strategic space and options, actually increased to 18.8%. So it's an increase from 16.2 to 18.1%, sorry, my mistake. And the option of ASEAN choosing sides because remaining neutral would be impractical. This option remains the least popular option at 6%, and it's a decrease from 11.1% in 2022. So this last option actually does reflect the region's desires to remain neutral. In this false binary question that we ask, if ASEAN were forced to align itself with one of the two strategic rivals, which one should it choose? The finding here is that the US continues to enjoy popular support versus China. So 61.1% chose the US and 38.9% chose China. The greatest support for the US came from the Philippines at 78.8%, Vietnam 77.9%, and Cambodia at 73.1%. Whereas the greatest support for China came from Brunei, 55%, Malaysia 54.8%, and Indonesia at 53.7%. In this third parties question that we asked, if ASEAN were to seek out third parties to hedge against the uncertainties of the US-China strategic rivalry, which one would be your most preferred and trusted strategic partner? The frontrunners, no surprise, continue to be EU at 42.9% and Japan at 26.6%. So the EU here is the top choice for all the regional countries except Myanmar. And the Cambodian respondents' support for the EU actually increased from 48.1% last year to 79.9%. And there was also a significant increase for India from 6th and last place last year at 5.1% to third place this year at 11.3%. So the confidence we saw in India increased across all ASEAN countries except for Cambodia. And this may be due to India exercising its strategic autonomy, coupled with a key milestones such as the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-India dialogue relations that was celebrated last year. And that led to an elevation of the comprehensive strategic partnership status for India, as well as the upcoming G20 presidency that India will host. All these events are possible reasons for creating greater visibility for the South Asian nation. At the midterm mark of the Biden administration, we asked our respondents whether they see the level of US engagement increasing or decreasing. Here, 39.4% of respondents perceive that the level of engagement has actually increased. And the optimism is felt by Brunei, Cambodia, the Philippines, and Singapore, with Cambodia expressing a significant increase from 27.2% to 74.6%. Whereas conversely, Myanmar experienced a significant decrease from 56.5% to 17.4%. And about 34.9% view that the level of engagement has remained unchanged. There was a slight increase in respondents who are less optimistic, and this is predominant in Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. Conversely, Cambodia and Laos saw significant declines in pessimism, and this might be explained by the fact that President Biden had a meeting with PM Hun Sen last year in November, and Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman also visited Laos in June last year. In this question, we asked how confident respondents were of the US as a strategic partner and provider of regional security. Here we have a large proportion, 47.2%, who say they are either confident or very confident of the US as a strategic partner and provider of regional security. And this is potentially, again, due to the high-level summits between ASEAN and the US, and several of the new security initiatives that were announced for the region last year as part of the 45th anniversary of ASEAN-US dialogue relations. I also want to add that the ASEAN-US relations was also elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership status. 32% of respondents expressed little or no confidence, and this is similar to 2022's results. But there was a shift in positions among regional countries, with more respondents from Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam choosing this option as their top choice. I will also combine the last section on perceptions of trust into this current presentation before we break for the panel discussion. In the trust and distrust rankings of the 5 major powers, and here we polled our respondents on China, US, EU, Japan, and India. Compared to 2022, we see that more countries actually experience an increase in trust perceptions. And China, US, and India saw their distrust ratings drop. For us, what was surprising was that India recorded the most impressive improvement in trust ratings from 16.6% last year to 25.7%, and its distrust ratings dropped from 47.8% to 44.2%. So Japan continues to maintain its lead as the region's most trusted power at 54.5%, but the US came in at a very close second place at 54.2%, so only a 0.3% difference. And this is followed by the EU at 51%, China 29.5%, and India at 25.7%. Now, if you look at the bar, the orange and yellow bars on top, that shows you the trust rankings, and the gray bars below shows you the distrust rankings. So here, Japan is still recognized as a responsible stakeholder in maintaining international law, and it is most trusted at 41%, albeit with a decline. at 46.6%. So the view is that Japan's military power can be used as an asset for peace and stability. This view saw a near threefold increase from 2.6% to 7.2% this year. And this can be due to the change in Japan's defense policy. And in the same vein, in the opposite, the threat perception that Japan's military prowess can be used to threaten other countries, that ranking remain relatively stable. And this remain also the weakest reason for distrust in Japan. So what's interesting is that the greatest reason for distrust in Japan actually points to Japan being more distracted with its own internal affairs and with its relationship with Northeast Asian countries. On the US, at second place, the US managed to narrow its margins last year between itself and Japan. So at the country level, we see that the Laos's trust in Japan registered a 43.9% increase, and Cambodia also increased at 29.6%. So I think clearly the trust dividends from Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman's visit and President Biden's meeting have actually paid off. And in this cohort that distrusted the US, about 30.7% believe that the US is distracted by its own internal affairs and thus cannot focus on global concerns and issues. And this view is shared widely by Singapore, Thailand, and Brunei. On the EU, at third place, the EU's trust ranking has remained strong and increased moderately this year. The positive views towards the EU is attributed to its leadership in championing human rights and climate change, which is considered as an asset for global peace and security. And the third of respondents who think that the EU is a responsible stakeholder that respects and champions international law has not changed from 2022. My last slide on the perceptions of distrust. So despite concerns of its military and economic clout, China's distrust ratings actually decreased from 58.1% in 2022 to 49.8%. When we polled the respondents, close to half at 49.8% say that they had little confidence or no confidence in China to do the right thing to contribute to global peace, security, prosperity, and governance. And only 29.5% were confident or very confident that China will step up to the plate. Here, amongst those, the prevailing reasons for distrust is the fear that its power, economic and military, can be used to threaten other countries. And this threat perception remains historically highest in Vietnam and lowest in Brunei. Sorry. Okay, on India, the distrust towards India dropped from 47.8% last year to 44.2% in 2023. And these trust rankings also correspondingly increased greatly from 16.6% to 25.7%. The prevailing view given by our respondents is that India is a responsible stakeholder. It respects and champions international law. It also possesses vast economic resources and the political will to exercise leadership. Yes, that's all from me. I move over to the panel discussion.
Thank you. I know that Wendy is on a very, very tight timeline. So before she signs off, which I presume she'll do in the next few minutes, I'd like to just ask her to comment on the ASEAN choosing US over China to the tune of 60+%. Any reaction to that? And also perhaps any reaction to the fact that most of the Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries in ASEAN actually did not choose the US. Yeah.
Well, first I would say, as an American, I was very pleased to see the high rankings of trust of the United States. But I also noticed, like you just pointed out, that for certain countries, particularly the Muslim countries, the trust factor was a lot lower. I don't know the answer. In fact, I'm going to ask Tommy Koh for his views there. It's pretty surprising to me because I know, particularly with respect to Indonesia and Malaysia, the Biden administration has made enormous efforts to increase ties and to work together on important issues like climate and supply chains and digitization, et cetera. So maybe we can turn it over to Tommy, and I want to listen to his explanation.
Yeah, okay. So Wendy, feel free when you need to go off. Just
okay, thank you.
Off. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
happy to explain to Wendy why the level of trust in you in the Muslim majority country is lower. This is because of your unbalanced policy towards Israel and the Palestinians. Not just to them, but to many countries in the world, your policy is not balanced. You favor the Israelis and you do not favor the Palestinians. You've allowed the Israelis to do horrible things in the occupied territories, and you've not held them to account. So how do you expect a Muslim country to have trust and confidence in you? You know, so that's my explanation.
Okay, I wondered if there was something unique to the overtures we're making.
No.
As individual ASEAN countries, do we need to be spending more time with these countries? But if it's what you say, then that's just a much broader issue.
Okay. So Tommy, can you just continue to just respond to the US being chosen over China? And continuing strongly to be chosen over China.
So my message is to Dongxiao. Our Chinese friends in Beijing must be wondering, how is it possible that we are regarded by the people of the region as the most powerful, most influential country economically and politically, and yet we are not trusted by the region? And I want to try to answer that question. Dongxiao, you're not trusted by the region for 3 reasons. In 2014, when the Philippines invoked its rights under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to refer its disputes with China to arbitration, what did you do? You weaponized trade and tourism to punish the Philippines. So the other ASEAN countries are worried that with your enormous power, you will weaponize your economic power to punish any country that goes against your wishes. The second reason why you're not trusted is your conduct in the South China Sea. To many ASEAN countries, there is no legal basis supporting your extensive claims in the South China Sea. And one of the rulings of the Arbitral Tribunal in 2016 was to the effect that the 9-line map put forward by China to support its claim has no legal basis. The third reason why you're not trusted is your behavior on the Langchang Mekong River. I don't know whether my Chinese friends know that there's a difference between national rivers and international rivers. In a national river, you have absolute sovereignty. You can do whatever you want. You can build as many dams as you want. But Mekong is an international river. You cannot build dams in the upper reaches of the Langchang without taking into consideration the interests of the lower riparian states. And people living in the lower riparian state, especially in Vietnam and Cambodia, are suffering from the 11 dams that you built in the upper reaches of the river. So for all these 3 reasons, you can understand why the people in ASEAN country don't trust you.
Yeah, I guess Professor Chen would want to respond, and I do invite him to do that right now, but also to, in addition to responding to that, also kind of give his view on whether the other trusted partners, what would be the implications of strengthening collaboration with these other partners? Yeah. Professor Chen, over to you.
Yeah, I think that actually this is 2-party questions, both from you and as well as from Tommy. I think that I value your your points very much. And I think for China, a rising power is quite established power actually for its influence in the region. How to continue to contribute a more regional public goods, and which will share value and really appreciated by the regional countries, including other countries. That is very important, which means that this is not only what Beijing believes, that this is a kind of regional public goods we believe are very important, but also should be perceived as a really positive regional public goods shared and even delivered to the average people, large number of people. That's very important. So I think that there's still, Beijing has a lot of job to do. And I think regional countries in their cooperation, including economic investment cooperation with Beijing, should also have their own responsibility to how to carry on those benefits to a large number of average people. So I think that this is not only a Beijing to blame, but I know that Beijing should still have a lot of work to do. The second one is, as you mentioned, we need to handle those disputes, particularly in terms of those maritime territorial issues in a more diplomatic way. And so I think that I'm still looking forward to a more accelerating pace of a COC dialogue. But I think that now we have seen a somewhat, slowing down the pace for many complicated reasons. So I hope that this year, and when I check those calendars of the ASEAN-China dialogue, I expect that there will be a more momentum from both sides in a concerted way to meet each other to try to make deals of COC communication or COC dialogue. And the last but not least is I think ASEAN and China share a lot in making the regional economic and even including security arrangements more inclusive. I think that we share those views, and I think Beijing share those views, and it's also this kind to how to make an inclusive architecture is still very important. With regard to Mr. Choi's question about how China see those broadening horizon of involving more power into it, I think ASEAN has tried to play a more active convening role, both at the regional and international levels. So ASEAN Plus Summits is one of the most prominent platforms. And last year, Indonesia has successfully played the leadership in convening G20 summit against a very difficult situation. So I think that one is, from my perspective, it is valuable to have key players of international arena, or key players of international area, and the most important international organizations together by ASEAN to address those multinational, transnational global challenges and to accumulate consensus and trust building. So convening power is still one of the most impressive, flagship, the stamp or character of ASEAN. Second one is, I think ASEAN itself is not only a passive receiver of international rules. ASEAN could also and should and could be more influential in contributing to the international norms and the rules building. I think many developing countries and the rising powers have been shifting their role from roles receiving, roles following only to a more on its role of rules making. So I think that this is also we could have a more talking. Beijing, ASEAN can work on that.
Thank you. Let me now shift over to Shivshankar, and would you like to comment on the same pattern, which is that broadening of the Southeast Asia's strategic partners, and also how they are perhaps strengthening in terms of trust? And let me also add on to that your views of why India's trust is growing now. Are there valid reasons, and what the implications of those are? So yeah, over to you, Shivshankar.
Thank you. It seems to me that ASEAN's broader cooperation across with several other partners other than China and the US would certainly help the situation that we find ourselves in, just as it's ASEAN initiatives that led to EAS, to APEC, to RCEP, which have increased economic predictability, improved the climate for business, and so on. So it seems to me that ASEAN's ability to provide forums for discussion of difficult issues, I think that certainly would be enhanced the more partners who are engaged. About the perceptions of trust towards India, we start from a relatively low bar. It's so, yes, it looks dramatic, but the movement's positive, it's in the right direction. But it seems to me that this is hardly enough. I mean, one needs much more. There is potential here for, why has it happened? I think Sharon mentioned, one of them, I think, is ASEAN's fear of becoming an arena of great power conflict. Probably makes India's behavior and adherence to strategic autonomy attractive. I mean, I think there is a correlation maybe there. Also, I think if you look at the changing nature of the Indian diaspora, I think that shouldn't be underestimated. I think that's changed. And the nature of cooperation between India and ASEAN has changed. It's gained some depth, nowhere near enough. But we clearly need to do much more to improve. I mean, for me, I've been a long-term advocate of India being in RCEP, for instance, of much closer economic integration. But for me, on the political, defense, security side as well, I think there's much more that we could be doing together. I know that Ambassador Koh actually has a book which includes several suggestions for how we should improve our relationship. And I only hope that that gets implemented. He has a reputation as a bit of a prophet, so maybe I should, maybe it's more than hope. Maybe it's expectation.
Okay, Tommy, you'd like to respond and also your comment on India? Yeah.
I must confess that I'm a friend of India. And as a friend of India, I'm very sad at the responses. India has practically zero economic influence in the region, 0.7%. India has practically zero political influence in the region, 0.9%. India is not seen by the region as a champion of global free trade or champion of the rules-based international order. These, to me, are such disappointing results. There's tremendous potential in the ASEAN-India relationship, and we are not working hard enough to realize that potential. So my message to my Indian friends is that you have got to work harder in ASEAN, and my message to my ASEAN colleagues is that we must also work harder in India and make this relationship bloom, you know. And together with two good friends, Hanai and Mo, we have co-edited a book on ASEAN and India, the way forward. And I thank Sharon and Shivshankar for contributing to the book. This book contains many new ideas on how we can re-energize this relationship and also suggested a new agenda for cooperation.
Thank you very much for that. We could continue on this for a long time, but our time is coming to an end quite soon. So I'd like to give some time to go through the Q&A for questions that have been put into by our participants. So let me start with this question from Mr. John Goyer. I don't know where he's from, it wasn't indicated, but perhaps he's from the US. His point, he says the point about the lack of market access in IPEF is well taken, but to perhaps question the conventional wisdom on this, setting aside China, the average applied US tariff is less than 2%. Is this really, therefore, ASEAN's concern? If not, then what else is it looking for? And what does economic engagement really mean from ASEAN's perspective? So perhaps, Prof. Koh, you could answer that, give your answer on what you think about that. Yeah, and perhaps others you can also join in if you like. Yeah.
ASEAN would like to have more American investment in our region, more bilateral trade between us. Ideally, we would like the Biden administration to return to the CPTPP, which was a very important economic regional framework for cooperation between the United States and countries in this region. But the political realities in Washington make it not possible for the Biden administration to return to the CPTPP. IPEF is, in my view, not an equivalent of CPTPP. And the one missing element is market access. My American friend may not understand, but in Asia, we live by trade, So trade is very important to us. It's not just an economic issue, it's also a security issue. And for IPEF not to have a pillar that deals with market access is a shortcoming.
Fair enough, but I think the point that the participant put in is that is 2% tariff removal such a big signature? Does it make such a big difference, or is it just symbolic?
But there are non-tariff barriers.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's move on the same vein. On IPEF, there is another question from Mr. Agung Masalindo, who is from the Institute of Essential Services Reform in Indonesia. And he is asking, in connection to IPEF, that whether there is a reason for the reaction to IPEF being related, in his view, to BRI to some extent, either in competition or perhaps associating that since BRI is negative, maybe IPEF being advanced for competition reasons might also be negative. At least that's how I interpret his question. Perhaps Shivshankar, you might want to respond, because I think South Asia receives a lot of BRI as well. Do you think that is it could cloud the thinking of IPEF one way or the other?
I'm not sure, because I think we're comparing apples with oranges here. Because for me, IPEF, I mean, if it achieves its potential, full potential, is more on like OECD. It's not a trading arrangement, it's not a free trade arrangement, but it's an arrangement which tries to set the broad rules and to unify thinking on broader economic policy issues. BRI is started as connectivity, and is essentially, it includes a whole host of other things, but over time, I think it's going back to where it started from, as an economic and digital and other forms of connectivity, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's... So I'm not sure that, strictly speaking, we should see one as competing with the other. In fact, it seems to me the logical thing that both will go on simultaneously. But yes, given the impression that both these are projections of power by big economic global superpowers, whether it's BRI, whether it's IPEF, and so on, to that extent, yes, they will both arouse some negative reactions in countries which don't want to have to choose sides, whose greatest fear, I think, as the survey shows, is to become an arena of great power competition. So yes, I think the answer would be yes. I'm not sure that I've answered the question, but that's what I think.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I will I'm sure Professor Chen also has something to respond to that, but I will just read another question, and if Professor Chen would like to answer that question as well, or to answer this coming question, then please join in. So this coming question I'm highlighting is from Bhagya Shri Garika from Straits Times. And she actually would like to address the question to me, but I'm not answering questions. So the question is more for the panelists, particularly Professor Koh. are there elements in ASEAN's reactions to the Ukraine war that you think could be usefully applied to ASEAN's response in a hypothetical Taiwan war scenario? So perhaps Professor Chen, you would like to respond to the earlier question about which relates, kind of draws in IPEF and compares IPEF with BRI, and then perhaps Professor Tommy Koh can then respond to this one. If you want to answer, give your view on that question as well, please do. Yeah.
I think that for the interest of time, I think to some extent, I agree with Ambassador Menon's observation. I think BRI is a kind of a quite innovative idea from Beijing to try to bring more connectivity with the region, and in the past few years, it also stressed more important about the green economy or digital transition connectivity. In addition to those, a traditional conventional understanding of the infrastructure, connectivity, etc. Of course, I think that there's still a lot of job for Beijing to try to this economic initiative a more multilateralized, and also would involve more stakeholders involved to share the benefits in a more substantial way. I think that this year there will be a big event in Beijing to address those achievements, as well as the problems or difficulties ahead of us. And as IPIF, I think that it is quite a revised version. It's a new version of trying to replace those conventional WTO based those free trade ideas. I think that it is totally try to set up the new key and new term for the international trade.
Thank you. Tommy?
Craig is the foreign editor of the Straits Times. So my short answer to you, Bhagya, is that there's a fundamental difference between Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine is a sovereign independent country and Taiwan not.
Okay. Let me now move on to bring in some other countries in the Q&A they are raised. So first of all, from Mr. John Urell from, I believe, Australia, he says that the Australian government, since coming into power in May 2022, has sought to increase engagement and says it is listening more. Would your panel of experts agree or have comments on this? And let me also bring in a question from Mr. Yi Kwang Heng from the University of Tokyo, who says that Japan has unveiled significant changes in its revised national security strategy in December 2022. Could the panel please kindly comment on the implications on Japan's influence, trust, and regional balance of power? So let me ask Shivshankar, then Chen Dongxiao, and then Tommy to respond to these two questions in that order.
On the new Japanese national security strategy, I think it's part of this process of Japan behaving like other great powers, of Japan being normalized in her approach. And it's probably a logical reaction to what we've seen, including to it's one of the side effects, I think, of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is really a much heightened perception of insecurity across the board. And you see increasingly more and more countries relying on themselves for their own security needs and working much more closely with their other partners. So it's part of a logical sort of progression which has been happening for quite some time in Japan. So I think how countries react to it depends on how they see it affecting their direct interests. From an Indian point of view, it's welcome, because maritime security across the Indo-Pacific is something that we have worked with Japan with in the Quad and other places. And it is an issue that does concern us, concerns, I think, everybody's future. Our future prosperity depends on these sea lanes staying open and secure. On the increased engagement by the new Australian government, again, we've seen that in our relationship with Australia. And certainly the new government has reached out in several areas. For India, at least, we've seen an initial FTA, which we're hoping to expand. We've also had the first visitor we had was the new Australian Defence Minister. And we've seen the relationship grow considerably in the last few years. And we've seen a major commitment by this Australian government. So yes, I would agree with the statement that John Urel has made.
Tommy?
I compliment the new government of Australia, especially the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the Foreign Minister Penny Wong for having done a very good job in getting closer to ASEAN. The first trip that the Prime Minister made abroad was to Indonesia, not to Washington. That is an important gesture to us in ASEAN that we are important to Australia. They've also taken very proactive steps to improve their relations with the Pacific Island countries. And they have also tried to improve their relationship with China. So I think that they've done a good job. On Japan, the reaction in our region to Japan is very different from the reaction in China and in the Koreas. In China and the Koreas, there's this deep-seated fear that Japan may again be a great military power, Whereas in Southeast Asia, I think the memory of World War II have gone, and Japan is the most trusted country in our region. So the fact that Prime Minister Kishida is trying to normalize the country is not something seen in a negative way by our region, unlike the perception in China and the Koreas.
Thank you. Professor Chen, you'd like to comment on Australia as well as on Japan, and perhaps I also added this question which is directed specifically at you. It comes from one of our colleagues in ISEAS, Hong Ti-ha, and her question was about the survey itself and how its results. How does it get discussed and does it get tossed up within the Chinese foreign policy think tanks, so that does it therefore sort of filter into the dialogues within China? Yeah. So perhaps on this three questions.
Well, I think that with regard to Beijing's relationship with Canberra, last year I led a small groups to visit Australia, even before the shift of China's COVID policy, and I think that both sides, I valued very much about that visit, and I can feel a strong passion as well as commitments from many of our counterparts, think tank people, university professors, and even quite a number of officials in Canberra to try to their commitments to re-stabilize the bilateral relationship or re-normalize bilateral relationship with Beijing with concerted efforts. I think now, the both governments have a very intensive interaction on that. I believe we will see a more positive interactions between two sides. With regard to the sea change of Japan's national security strategy, I think that as Tommy just mentioned, compared with a little bit maybe contrasted with the Southeast Asian countries' perception of Japan's security or national security strategy and intention, China's understanding and perception is different. So we monitor and watch very closely. And I think that as Beijing senior officials in their talking with their counterparts in Tokyo, that Beijing still try very hard to convince Tokyo that both sides need to work together to not see each other as an adversary, but as a partner on many transnational, regional, as well as international corporations. And I think that in addition to those military or security infrastructure building up in Tokyo in the years ahead, we have already seen a quite visible increase of the arms building up. But more important thing is whether those kind of strategic planning or intention behind is for a enemy hunting oriented or based on the enemy hunting, or rather for just a normal deterrence or security building. I think that is what we observe, and we should watch those military building up in Tokyo, as well as this military and security strategies very closely. I think that we should all work together to, minimize the negative impact of those enemy hunting mentality in our security idea. And with regard to the last question, if I understand correctly, I think that your survey and your reports will be very will be circulated and very will be read very closely and by Chinese think tanks people as well as officials. I believe that this is a very important index for us to check those changing mindset, even if we know that it is maybe not. It is only reflecting largely those elites' view. And to what extent that it will reflect a more average, normal people's view, I think that our overseas missions in Southeast Asian countries have their own perception and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. Now let me, we're getting close to the end, but let me bring one more question that is in the Q&A box. This is from Abdul Rahman bin Yaakob. And he says that the negative perception of ASEAN's capability in the survey is interesting and contrasted with our own research findings. I'm not sure which institute he's from. He says that the majority of Southeast Asian defense officials interviewed by our project team in a recent Australian Army-funded project consider ASEAN as an important platform to advance their country's security. Could there be a divergent perception between military and non-military, I guess, respondents or opinion makers in Southeast Asia on ASEAN's capability to deal with regional issues? In other words, I guess, is it, if we focus just on security, is ASEAN actually perhaps more highly seen, and compared to, say, those people who look at the economics or the other sociological challenges? Tommy, would like to respond to this first? Yeah.
I don't know the answer to the question, but I suspect the defense official will have a more focused and practical attitude. And I think they see the Defense Minister Dialogue, ADMM, and the ADMM Plus as a very valuable initiative taken by ASEAN,
Thank you. So let me now put one question that had on a subject that had not yet arisen so far, just to close off this Q&A section before I turn it back to, I know we've already overrun, but ask your indulgence. And this is on the Myanmar issue. I think that the survey has shown that moving the ASEAN, the Myanmar issue forward, the results are more or less the same, except there is actually a reduced belief in the international community. This is because there has been a drop from almost a quarter of respondents to down to 15%. That just doing diplomatic actions in coordination with the community, that would make a difference. And there's also a more polarized belief, both on taking harder measures like expulsion, as well as going to the other extreme, which is just don't interfere at all and leave it all alone. Do you have any comments, all three panelists, on this, that the Myanmar issue is, sort of frustrating everyone, and that even the international community is not able to do anything, and therefore either harder measures or just leaving them alone is the better, is the kind of pathway that more people are beginning to conclude is the best way. So perhaps Chen Dongxiao, then Shivshankar, and then Tommy to round it all up. Yeah.
Well, as Myanmar is a neighboring country of China, so I think that we also watch very closely, and I think for Beijing as well as the average scholars here, we expect that Myanmar will be back to a more sustainable development as well as stability, and hope that those political difficulty period of time would be solved and through our concerted efforts. But I still very, very much about those ASEAN way to address those Myanmar issues. I'll stop here.
Shivshankar?
Well, I think the numbers you quoted suggest the frustration and the desire to actually see a solution, but the fact that nobody can quite see one. I think I've said clearly that I think that ASEAN can maybe play a slightly greater diplomatic role. I suggested some form of proximity talks, for instance, because I think that's the only way that we will approximate, at least get an idea of what is possible and where we are going. Because right now we don't even seem to have a clear goal in mind, apart from a few abstract nouns about peace and stability and etc. So for me, yes, I think the effort is certainly worth making. And as for all of us, I think we're all, I mean, Myanmar is a member of ASEAN, India, China, we're all neighbors. We have a clear interest in progress being made out of today's situation.
I like Shivshankar's idea that in addition to being focused on the 5-point consensus, ASEAN might consider holding proximity talks on Myanmar to see whether we can get the regional country stakeholders to help us to move forward on Myanmar. I was struck by a few things that Sharon said earlier. One, I was surprised that a big percentage of the respondents were neutral about the 5-point consensus. I mean, to ask ASEAN officials, our entire focus has been on how do we implement the 5-point consensus. And I was struck that I think over 30% of the respondents say they are neutral. Their concern about the potential for disunity is true. I point out that on 22nd December last year, Thailand invited the foreign minister appointed by the military junta to a meeting in Bangkok. And Thailand then invited the other 8 foreign ministers to attend the meeting. Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore declined the invitation, but Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam attended the meeting. So the conclusion I draw is that Actually, the military junta has the support of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Then the foreign minister met in Jakarta on the 3rd and 4th of February this year under the chairmanship of Indonesia. And at the end of that meeting, the Indonesian foreign minister, Ibu Retno Marsudi, said the ministers are agreed on a united approach towards dealing with the Myanmar crisis by implementing the 5-point consensus. So I don't know whether Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam have agreed to stop supporting the military junta and give the 5-point consensus a chance, or whether this was just a paper consensus in Jakarta. No? But whatever it is, I'm very pessimistic because I don't think the military junta will implement the 5-point consensus, which, just to remind everybody, means stop the violence, release the political prisoners, allow humanitarian existence to get through to the people in need, bring everybody around the negotiating table. And up to now, the ASEAN Special Envoy and the UN Special Envoy have been denied access to the NLD leaders which are under detention. So I'm very pessimistic.
Well, thank you very much. And I apologize for ending this webinar on a rather pessimistic note, but it is a subject that ASEAN has to face, and one which I believe that many respondents were thinking of when they said that ASEAN was slow and unable to deal with this, because it's actually not so much that ASEAN is slow, but this challenge is really a hefty one. So it leaves me just to say thank you to everyone for attending this, and also thank you to our sterling panel of speakers, Professor Tommy Koh, Mr. Shivshankar Menon, Professor Chen Dongxiao, and of course not forgetting Ms. Wendy Cutler, who had to run off to bed to get ready for her next trip tomorrow morning in the US. So thank you everyone, and let me hand back to our MC, Jia Hui.
Yeah, actually, I will take over from here. I know everyone is waiting eagerly for this. Our report is now live on the website of ISEAS, and you can find it here. You can download a copy here using the QR code or by clicking through the link which my colleague will send in the chat box. But very importantly, I also would like to inform everyone that we did notice that many of you did not receive our emails regarding the survey and also about this event. So we hope that you can stay on our mailing list by filling in this form and whitelisting our email address asc@iseas.edu.sg so that you can continue receiving our updates and information. This is extremely important because even my own updates came to my junk folder in ISEAS. So it's very important that you would stay on our mailing list. We hope that you continue with us in understanding Southeast Asia and ASEAN better. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Mr. Menon. And thanks, Prof. Chen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Choi. And thank you, Sharon.
Have a good day. Goodbye.
Have a good day.